It was just another quiet afternoon at a small seaside diner near Norfolk Naval Base. The grill sizzled with the sound of burgers cooking, the air filled with the aroma of grilled meat and fried onions. Behind the counter stood an old man, his back slightly bent, wearing a faded navy cap that had clearly seen better days. His hands moved with a slow but practiced rhythm as he flipped patties and wiped down the counter. Most of the young sailors who came in barely paid him any attention. To them, he was just Old Bill, the guy who made their burgers and smiled when they joked around. They never really thought about who he was before this small diner became his world. One group of sailors, new to the base and full of youthful arrogance, laughed when they saw the veteran humming an old Navy tune as he worked. "Hey, Pops," one of them said, "you ever actually serve, or you just wear that hat for tips?" The diner went silent for a brief second, but the old man only smiled faintly and said, "Served long enough to know how to make a perfect burger, son." The boys chuckled and went back to their table, throwing glances at him as if mocking the old man's slow movements. They didn't know that the man standing behind the counter had once carried a call sign that echoed through Navy history, "Ghost Rider." That evening, a sudden storm rolled in. The winds howled, rain lashed against the windows, and the old veteran stepped outside to cover the outdoor tables. As he worked, one of the sailors noticed the tattoos on his forearm, a faded trident and a set of coordinates. "You Navy?" one asked curiously. The old man nodded. "Was," he replied softly, "long time ago." Something about the way he said it caught their attention. The trident wasn't just any tattoo, it was the mark of the Navy SEALs. The sailor went back to his seat, curious now. He pulled out his phone and started asking around in his group chat. Anyone ever hear of a SEAL called Ghost Rider? A few minutes later, one of his buddies from another ship responded, "You mean the Ghost Rider, the guy from Operation Iron Tide? That man's a legend." Suddenly, the mood changed. The laughter died, replaced by a quiet tension. The sailor looked over at the old man, still calmly flipping burgers, his expression unreadable. They couldn't believe that the same man who had once led covert missions deep behind enemy lines was now working at a diner on the pier. The story spread fast. By the next day, half the sailors on base had heard about him. They started coming in, not just for the food, but to see the man who had once been a ghost in the Navy's most secret missions. One night, a young officer walked in and quietly saluted him. "Sir," he said, "my father served with you in 91. He said you saved his life." The old veteran froze for a moment, then smiled quietly. "Your old man was one of the good ones," he said, his eyes glistening. The younger sailors looked on, realizing that this man, this humble cook, had once been part of something extraordinary. As the days passed, they started treating him differently. They listened when he spoke, even though he rarely talked about his past. He shared small lessons instead of stories about teamwork, about respect, about never underestimating anyone. One evening after the diner closed, a few sailors stayed behind to help him clean up. One of them finally asked, "Why did you stop, sir? Why work here after everything you've done?" The veteran leaned on the counter, staring at the grill for a moment. "Because," he said slowly, "after years of seeing destruction, I just wanted to build something, even if it's just good meals and good company." There was silence in the room as his words sank in. "You don't always have to be on the battlefield to serve your country," he added. "Sometimes you serve by reminding others of what matters." The next week, the sailors organized a small ceremony at the diner. They printed out an old photo they'd found, a younger version of the same man, standing in front of a helicopter with his SEAL team, all smiles and mud, streaked faces. They framed it and hung it above the counter. When the veteran saw it, he didn't say much. He just looked at it for a long time and whispered, "Didn't think anyone remembered." The officer smiled. "Sir, legends don't get forgotten. They just trade their uniforms for aprons." From that day forward, no one laughed at the old man flipping burgers. They came to the diner not just for food, but for the chance to talk to the man whose courage had written history in silence. Every now and then, when the evening sun hit the counter just right, you could still hear him humming that old Navy tune. The sailors would listen quietly, knowing that behind the simple sound was a life of sacrifice, loyalty, and unspoken heroism. And in that little seaside diner, surrounded by the scent of burgers and the sound of the sea, they learned a lesson they'd never forget. Greatness doesn't fade with age, and respect should never be given based on appearances. Because sometimes, the man flipping your burger once commanded the skies and seas under a call sign the world will never forget: Ghost Rider. It started as just another ordinary day on the coast. The kind of lazy afternoon when the sun glimmers off the waves and the smell of salt and grilled meat fills the air. The small diner by the naval docks was alive with chatter, laughter, and the steady hiss of burgers cooking on the grill. Behind the counter stood an old man, his back slightly hunched, his face marked with lines that spoke of years at sea and battles long past. His navy cap, faded and frayed, sat proudly on his head as he worked the grill with quiet precision. To the young sailors who stopped by for lunch, he was just Old Bill, the burger guy with the slow smile and old tunes. They saw him as harmless, maybe even a little pitiful. To them, his glory days were long gone, if he ever had any. One group of new sailors, cocky and fresh out of training, couldn't resist poking fun. "Hey, old-timer." One of them called out, grinning as his friends laughed, "You sure you didn't burn those burgers in Vietnam too?" The old man didn't look up. He simply flipped another patty and said softly, "I've cooked for tougher crowds, son." His calmness only made them laugh harder. To them, it was just another joke, another story to tell later. But what none of them knew was that the man behind the counter had once carried a name that echoed through the Navy: Ghost Rider. His call sign was whispered with respect, sometimes even awe. He had flown missions no one else dared, saved men who were presumed lost, and vanished into storms that swallowed entire fleets. But all that was long before the laughter of young sailors filled this diner. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the storm clouds began to roll in, the diner grew quiet. The old man went out to cover the tables, his movements slow but steady. The wind tugged at his apron and his cap, revealing a tattoo on his arm, a trident with wings. One of the sailors noticed and frowned. "Wait a second," he muttered. "Is that a seal trident?" The others leaned in to look. The old man gave a small nod. "Once upon a time," he said simply before heading back inside. The group exchanged glances. Curiosity replaced mockery. That night, one of them pulled out his phone and searched the name that had been etched on the old man's hat: W.H. Rider. Within seconds, the search results popped up, and their laughter turned to silence. Ghost Rider, the screen read: Navy SEAL Commander William H. Rider, decorated for heroism in multiple classified missions, credited with saving dozens of lives during Operation Iron Tide. A legend, presumed killed in action 25 years ago. The young sailor's voice trembled as he read it aloud. None of them spoke for a long moment. They couldn't believe that the man they had mocked earlier was the same Ghost Rider who had once been the stuff of legends. The next morning, the group came back to the diner early. The old man was already there, setting up the grill. They approached him quietly, no longer joking, no longer cocky. One of them finally said, "Sir, we looked you up. You're Ghost Rider, aren't you?" The veteran looked at them, his eyes tired but calm. "That name belongs to another time," he said softly. "I'm just Bill now, but the sailors couldn't let it go. Sir, why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" He wiped his hands on his apron and smiled faintly. "Because," he said, "the world doesn't need heroes who brag. It needs people who still care enough to do their job right, even if that job is just flipping burgers." There was something in his voice, quiet authority, mixed with the wisdom of someone who had seen too much. The sailors stood there, unsure how to respond. That day, they ate their meals in silence, not out of guilt, but out of respect. The word spread quickly around the base. Soon, everyone knew that Old Bill wasn't just a cook. He was a man who had once been a legend in uniform. Senior officers began stopping by to shake his hand. Young recruits came to listen to his quiet advice, and the walls of the diner began to fill with framed photos of ships, squadrons, and even one of him standing with his old SEAL team mud, smeared, smiling, fearless. One evening, a young officer walked in carrying a folded American flag. "Sir," he said, "this was sent by one of your old teammates. He said you'd know what it means." The old man took it slowly, his hands trembling as memories flickered across his eyes. "That flag flew over our last mission," he whispered. "Didn't think any of them were still around." The officer smiled. "They said the same about you." For a long moment, the diner was silent, except for the sound of the rain against the windows. The old man placed the flag in a glass case above the counter, right next to a photo of his SEAL team. "They were the best men I ever knew," he said quietly. "I just wish I could have done more." One of the sailors spoke up, his voice low but steady. "You did enough, sir. You're the reason most of them made it back." The veteran looked at him and smiled faintly. "Maybe," he said, "but in the end, it's not about medals or call signs. It's about living with honor even when no one's watching." From that day on, no one laughed when they saw him behind the counter. The diner became something of a sacred place, a reminder of courage, sacrifice, and humility. Sailors from all over would stop by just to hear his quiet wisdom or to shake his hand. They'd ask him for stories, but he never gave more than fragments, enough to teach, never enough to glorify. When asked why he chose to run a diner after such a life, he would always answer the same way: "Because I've done enough fighting. Now I just feed people. That's enough peace for me." In time, a small plaque appeared above the grill that read, "Operated by William Ghost Rider Ryder, hero, brother, legend." The old veteran never asked for it, but he never took it down either. Some nights, when the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and storms, the sailors would hear him humming a quiet Navy tune as he cleaned up for the night. They'd sit there, watching him, realizing that true greatness doesn't always wear medals or command ships. Sometimes it wears an apron and stands behind a grill, teaching respect by simply living it. And for those who ever doubted, they'd only have to look at the man flipping burgers to know that legends never really fade. They just find new battles worth fighting.